I'm going to preface this with the fact that this is less of a eulogy and more of an interview with Dad. And I can do this because I got a book for Dad that asked him a load of questions about his life that he really needed to answer. I gave him some family homework. So some of what I'll share today is really in his own words, which I think is quite appropriate given we know Dad really kind of loved doing things properly. So here's where it all starts. Haywood, October 25th, to Dorothy Irene née Medley and Leslie, the greatly desired gift of a son, Roger Leslie. Grateful thanks to all at Hallam Hospital. So what the newspaper announcement didn't tell us was that the birth wasn't exactly straightforward. His cord was wrapped around his neck, so with each contraction and push, Dad would get more and more strangled. He joked that threatening to strangle him was something his mother would continue to do throughout his childhood, and in a way, hearing some of the stories he told us, one did have some sympathy for her. Because even as a 2-year-old, he'd somehow mastered the art of climbing on top of the sideboard, emptying the contents onto the floor and climbing inside. And when his brother Peter came along, it was double the fun. He had a brother to entertain and be entertained by. With his brother, he could have castaway fires in the den behind the substation at Levita Road. I think this was early exposure to electrical switchgear. There were pyrotechnic adventures, testing how many fireworks you needed to strap together in order to hit the haystack in the adjoining field. Thankfully, this never really happened. His maths really did suck. And when Cousin Diane came over, there were often playful pillow fights or games where Peter would sometimes end up being tied to the washing line. But it wasn't all madcap moments. Dad treasured the childhood memories he had with his parents. Nan and Grandad weren't well to do, but that didn't stop them from making the most out of things, especially going on holiday. By far, Dad's favourite holidays were those in the Lake District. Nan's roadside breakfast with the gas stove on the drive on the way up. And when they finally arrived, Dad and Pete would be content trying to fill up Coniston Lake, skimming flat pebbles into it. The Lake District would be one of those places Dad would revisit many times later on in life with his own family and the scouting family he'd ultimately become involved with. Back home, there was Dad's other passion, steam trains. Come rain or shine, there was always train spotting on Platform 9 at Crewe Station. A few hours of gathering as many locomotive numbers in the train spotting book, and another excuse for Nan's picnics. Then there was her own model railway back at home, which Grandad painstakingly built in the third bedrooms of both Robinson Road and Levita Road. Talking about the railway, Dad said, "I was blessed with a good imagination, always helpful in play. So for me, our model railway was a real working railway, with timetables to keep and schedules to be maintained. And you can bet with Dad being in charge, these schedules were indeed maintained." Dad was also blessed with parents who taught by example some key facts of life. Because his mother was all about family, making time to see family, creating moments where we could all be together, time to laugh and celebrate, as well as time to be there when we needed to support each other. Last year when I suggested doing a family reunion, his response was immediate. We have to make this happen. And we did. From all corners of the world, we sat, ate, laughed and celebrated us, our family. I think his mum would have been proud. His father was a practical, diligent one, clever with his hands, the engineer, the photographer, all gifts he passed on to Dad. The railway he built brought him and his sons many hours of pleasure together, as did photography later on in their lives. Dad said, "My father wasn't an obsessive perfectionist, but he liked things being done perfectly." And without realising it, Dad was also describing himself. Now at school, Dad wasn't academically minded, so one of his proudest moments was passing his 11 plus and getting into the local grammar school. This happened despite the fact that at some time prior to him taking exams, he'd overheard his father talking to a family friend over his doubts about getting the grades. I believe this was a big thing for Dad, and this is why his pride in people wasn't really about the result. He was proud of us when we showed we had the want to achieve something and better ourselves. Once at grammar school, Dad had the usual interests and hobbies of boys his age. He wrote, "I like my comics, played rugby as well as tennis with my brother. I also loved a good party. My best friend Dickie Mayer would often host a good party on the weekend, one of which was when I finally got to meet your mother. I can't go into too much detail, but let's just say after that moment, my favourite hobby became your mother." From that moment on in 1960, they pretty much spent most of their lives together. After doing electrical engineering at Manchester University and getting married in 1964, my parents bought their first home in Manor Farm Crescent in Stafford. They could afford this because Dad started his apprenticeship at the English Electric Company. They bought the place off plan, but couldn't afford the £300 extra for central heating or the option of a garage. But that was okay, because this is where his DIY prowess manifested itself. He drafted the design and did the groundwork for a new garage, as well as a retaining wall in the garden. And this wouldn't be the only garage he'd design in his lifetime. It was also at Manor Farm Crescent that Dad got involved with scouting. Barbara and Peter Coxon lived next door, and Dad was always intrigued with the random arrival of an old bread van on their drive, from which emerged piles of sopping wet camping gear. Daddy eventually asked Peter what it was all about, and Peter said, "Well, come with me on Friday, I'll show you." And this was the start of Dad's scouting journey. He started as assistant leader to the Admiral Jarvis, and eventually became the leader. He got into sailing and qualified as an RYA instructor. Gradually, he became more involved in county activities and leader training. And in 1984, when the world at English Electric was becoming too political and stressful, he responded to a leader training post being advertised at Gilwell Park, the National Scout headquarters, which of course he got. Thus began 15 years of the happiest part of Dad's career, being paid for a hobby and having one of the nicest walks to work you could imagine. Dad loved the job because he could bring his expertise and perspective of being a volunteer scouter to create training programs that really helped the grassroots leaders. I think ultimately, Dad also loved seeing people learn and develop skills that he knew would be valuable to them, both in and out of their scouting lives. And it's during this era, many new and lasting friendships were made for Dad. Gilwell Park was another place the DIY maestro came alive, a crazy paving path that circumnavigated their home. It included flower beds, a sunken garden. I lost track of the number of times I was sent out to get bags of cement. All the times he and John Cole would disappear off, only to emerge with reclaimed slabs or bricks that would end up being used somewhere in the garden. And life after Gilwell, I think, was just as idyllic. Not only was Pot Row the ultimate long-term DIY challenge he could sink his teeth into, but it had a community of people who were doers, people with the want to make village and church life better for everyone. And it's this very church we're in today that Mum and Dad came to on their first weekend living in Pot Row. It's here they found the strength in their faith and found new and amazing friendships in the community. Eventually, Dad would become involved in the PCC, and realising more funds were needed to keep buildings like this going, he and a couple of others hatched this plan to create a fundraising Friends of St Botolph's group to help the funding gap and ensure the physical structure of the church could be managed. The Village Link newsletter, ad sales, traction engine rallies, snail racing, bacon butty making. Just a few of the activities, come rain or shine, they did to raise funds. Dad was part of the Friends for 17 years, right up to August of last year, where he finally had to hand over the reins and step away from the day-to-day needs of fundraising. So here we are today in the church being refurbished by the funds of Fosby, with a congregation representative of the many milestones of Dad's life, school friends, family, scouting family and his spiritual family. So that's my bit done, but I'm going to let Dad end his own eulogy. I'll share with you the answer to my last question in the book I gave him. It asks, "What advice do you have for me and my future?" Now ignore the fact he thought he was writing it for me. I truly think what advice Dad had was for everyone he knew and cared for. So close your eyes, picture whatever image you have of my dad in your memory, and imagine his voice talking to you now. Be happy. Look after your health, both mental and physical. Make the most of each day because they never come again. Keep a clear focus on what brings real value to your life and stand up for your principles. Be persistent, consistent, honest with yourself and others. Take time to reflect, learn the lessons, apply them and move on. And know that compassion isn't a sign of weakness, but rather what really makes the world go round. Thank you, Dad.